The Strait of Gibraltar is a narrow stretch of sea separating Europe and Africa. This place has long been the idea and dream of a grand project, a bridge or tunnel connecting the two continents. Anyway, we have a fascinating topic today, but first I'll make coffee, and then we'll continue. First, let's look into the location and distances to be covered. The Strait of Gibraltar connects the Atlantic Ocean and the Mediterranean Sea, and the length of the strait is roughly 37 miles. Obviously, along this length, there are spots where the strait is narrower. These should be more suitable for bridge construction. So the width of the strait ranges from 9 to 27 miles. But let's be honest, 27 miles is a bit much. Such long bridges over water just don't exist, and there's no point in changing that. Plus, there's a chance to build a shorter and more reliable bridge. In the narrowest part of the strait, Spain is only about 8 to 9 miles from the coast of Morocco. That's roughly 13 minutes by car, so it's really close. Almost forgot to unobtrusively remind those who forget to hit the like button not to forget to do it. As you realize, the fact that it's just a small distance was understood by people a long time ago. The governments of Spain and Morocco set up a joint committee to explore the possibility of connecting the two continents back in 1979. The committee led to the development of a much larger project called Euromed Transport. Also, since 1981, the Spanish government has been supporting a corporation dedicated to studying and promoting future intercontinental connections. But in general, the idea of a bridge and the fact that it might actually be useful came up much earlier than all these committees, corporations, and projects. And still, despite this, there's no bridge or underwater tunnel yet. Maybe it's all about the technical side of the question. Nope. At this point, humanity has all the technology needed to build such a bridge. Remember, right? The length of such a bridge or tunnel will be about 9 miles. And no, that's not so much for a bridge. Moreover, people have built such bridges and even longer ones. There are already about a dozen overwater bridges that are over 9 miles long. This, for example, is the bridge tunnel over the Chesapeake Bay, which is 15 miles long. By the way, the maximum width of the bay is 30 miles, but in this case, they also found a narrower spot. This is the Incheon Bridge in South Korea, 13 miles long. There's also the Shenzhen-Zhongshan link in China, which is 14 miles long. And finally, the longest bridge over water is the causeway across Lake Pontchartrain in the USA, which is 24 miles long. So compared to these giants, a hypothetical bridge across the 9-mile-long Strait of Gibraltar doesn't seem like something incredibly complex. And it's not just my opinion, because you can say anything you want on the internet, but the engineers think the same way. And there's even a pretty feasible bridge project. It looks like this. Deep supports, 2,985-foot-high towers, and a span of 16,404 feet. They even calculated the cost. Such a bridge would cost about $15 billion US. And if you think about it, it's not such a big price to pay for the chance to directly connect Africa, a continent with 1.5 billion people, and Southern Europe with 150 million people. There's a reason I'm mentioning the number of people on both sides. Such a bridge would clearly be used, and used all the time. According to all the studies done, this project makes sense from both a commercial and social standpoint, plus from a safety perspective. Overall, the potential value of connecting the two shores of the Mediterranean has never been questioned. Right now, they're only connected by sea, and reducing reliance on sea transport is a really big step towards continuous trade. After all, the weather at sea can sometimes be bad for shipping, but with the bridge, those problems won't exist. The advantages for intercontinental trade and tourism are enormous. The bridge would also be a huge plus for migration routes because it would allow to manage human traffic, and of course it would create tens of thousands of jobs, not just during construction, but also after the bridge is in use. But if everything is so cool, why hasn't the bridge been built yet? There are quite a few problems on the way to building the bridge, most of which are caused by its geographic location. First of all, there are strong currents and tidal flows, and the narrower the strait, the stronger the currents. They create an unpredictable environment where it's tough to build a stable bridge or a reliable tunnel. Even ships passing through the strait need to be careful. There's a whole list of dangers, from the rapid evaporation of water exceeding the inflow from rivers and rain to layers of seawater, each with different density and salinity. The water in the Atlantic is less salty and less dense than the water in the Mediterranean, and it flows east into the Mediterranean as a surface layer about 410 feet deep at a speed of 2 to 3 miles per hour. On the other hand, there is a western outflow of heavier, colder, and saltier water that makes its way into the Atlantic. This flow will either speed up or slow down the eastern current depending on the tide phase. These currents cause internal waves, which on the map look something like this. They can have a displacement sometimes exceeding 330 feet with a wavelength from 1 to 2.5 miles. Just so you understand, these waves can even be seen by astronauts in space. So how do you build a bridge in such conditions? Well then, maybe instead of a bridge, they could dig a tunnel. And again, there's a problem. The Gibraltar Strait is right on the edge of two tectonic plates, the African and Eurasian plates. If you didn't know, these edges are the places on the planet where earthquakes constantly happen because the plates are moving. And they move all the time. By the time the script for this video was written, a special portal had registered 183 earthquakes in the Mediterranean over the last 24 hours. Most are so minor that people don't even feel them, but they're still earthquakes, and they affect any buildings. Part of Spain near the Gibraltar Strait is actually in an area with a higher risk of earthquakes. On the other hand, the situation isn't any better. In 1960, in Morocco, relatively close to the strait, there was an earthquake with a 5.8 magnitude. It happened at a shallow depth, so the earthquake was incredibly destructive. As a result, between 12,000 and 15,000 people died. That is about a third of the population of Agadir, close to where the tremors occurred. Another 12,000 people were injured. At least 35,000 people were left homeless, making this earthquake the most devastating and deadly in Morocco's history. So yeah, this area is difficult to consider safe for construction. But the obstacles and problems don't end there. If it were possible to drain the water from the strait, draining it for a while, you'd uncover a complex terrain of valleys, peaks, ridges, and mud volcanoes. It was created by the force of a huge amount of water flowing through the strait, and also by tectonic movements. Building a bridge here is a complex task, not only because of the height difference. In the 1930s, they talked about building a tunnel, but they had to abandon the plans. It turned out that the rock at the bottom was just too hard. And to top it all off, the narrowest part of the strait is also the deepest, up to 3,000 feet. By the way, don't forget about ecology. Fortunately for the planet and its non-human inhabitants, in recent decades, humanity has been thinking much more about how our activities affect nature. The Strait of Gibraltar is a prime spot for nature lovers. You can see whales and dolphins here, as well as migratory birds. It's certainly not the kind of place where you can just dig everything up. There are also circumstances that have nothing to do with nature at all. The thing is, the construction has to take into account the presence of heavy marine traffic from east to west, and the bridge supports need to be able to withstand ship collisions. They're bound to happen from time to time. No one's immune against it. So it turns out there are a lot of things to consider before building a huge bridge between two continents, an enormous number of different buts. The Strait of Gibraltar is considered one of the busiest sea routes in the world. Every 5 minutes, a large ship passes through here, not to mention the countless smaller boats and various yachts. If the strait were blocked during construction, it would stop all global maritime trade. So, of course, there are alternative routes, but they take a lot more time, and time is money. Faster options might be unsafe due to weather conditions or even piracy, so the Strait of Gibraltar must function all the time. It's estimated that 120,000 ships pass through it each year. For comparison, around 13,000 to 14,000 ships pass through the Panama Canal annually, and about 20,000 ships go through the Suez Canal. Plus, both of these canals are man-made, while the Gibraltar Strait was created by nature itself. Although it's unlikely that nature anticipated such heavy shipping traffic here, there are ships that go through the strait to deliver goods from west to east. This is how deliveries to Europe are made. There are also ships going to the Black Sea, and they need to go through this place as well. Basically, stopping the ships here is impossible, even for a day. And building a bridge when there's constantly something floating around is just unrealistic. Oh, and don't forget that this bridge has to be high enough for even the largest ships to pass under. For a moment, I thought they could make a drawbridge. But alas, then it would always have to stay raised, and the whole idea would be completely pointless. To understand how high a bridge needs to be, just look at a container ship. The sizes of the largest ones have been growing since the early 1980s, and it's not surprising, since for shipping companies, bigger ships mean bigger profits. The larger the vessel, the more cost-effective each trip becomes. However, larger ships can also create more serious disasters if accidents happen. The largest container ship today is the MSC Arena, with a length of 1,312 feet and a width of 200 feet. but it's hard to imagine just from numbers, so here's an example. The height of the Empire State Building is 1,456 feet. If you put the skyscraper next to the ship, they'd be almost the same size, except for the spire, of course. Yes, the MSC Arena regularly passes through the Strait of Gibraltar. As of the time this video was made, the container ship left it about a week ago. When designing a bridge, you also need to take into account the height of ships, which can reach up to 230 to 260 feet. Of course, part of this height is underwater, but the numbers are still impressive. Moreover, ships are constantly being modified and getting bigger and bigger, so this must also be factored in when building a bridge over a strait. Overall, overcoming all the obstacles and still building a bridge is theoretically possible, but in practice, it's so expensive that the cost of the bridge is considered enormous. Today, it's estimated at no less than $80 million per 0.6 miles, with a minimum length likely to be 10 miles. The cost of building a permanent connection between the continents can't be less than $1.25 billion for 0.6 miles. So ever since the project started more than 40 years ago, the main issue boils down to the costs, and they're just too high. But what about the tunnel? Things get way more interesting here. In December 2003, Spain and Morocco agreed to explore the possibility of building an underwater railroad tunnel. It's supposed to connect the rail systems of the two countries. Do you also feel like you've heard this somewhere before? And for good reason, a similar tunnel runs under the English Channel, the strait separating France and the UK, but there are differences. The area around the Strait of Gibraltar is far less stable than the English Channel. Well, you remember the fault, earthquakes, currents? For a long time, there weren't any proposals for the project at all, until in February 2023, the governments of Morocco and Spain decided to resume it. That's how I found out it was probably on hold. Well, it's not anymore, and they've even scheduled the start of construction for 2030. The underwater section of the tunnel will be 17 miles long and will be laid at a depth of 1,560 feet. The construction will take 15 years. Hold on, where did 17 miles come from? An observant viewer might ask. Wasn't it 9 miles? But this one's simple. They ditched the idea of digging a tunnel at the narrowest point because, as I mentioned earlier, it's way too deep there. Digging 3,000 feet below sea level isn't the best idea. Just so you know, the deepest underwater tunnel currently, Norway's Reykjavik, sits at a depth of 955 feet. And that's already quite a lot. The Gibraltar Tunnel will connect the Spanish Punta Paloma Cape, located west of Tarifa, with the Malabata Cape in northern Morocco, east of Tangier. The project will cost around $8.8 billion and could transport 12.8 million passengers a year. If all goes well, it'll become a key trade link with the potential to carry 13 million tons of cargo between Africa and Europe. Plus, the tunnel will cut travel time between Madrid and Casablanca to just 5.5 hours. Right now, a flight takes about 2 hours, while driving, including a ferry crossing, takes up to 12 hours. Today, building a tunnel under the Strait of Gibraltar is considered one of the most ambitious underwater projects in the world, and overall, rightfully so. Optimal shape. Not too long ago, British scientists employed mathematical modeling to come up with new bridge designs in an effort to discover the perfect bridge between Europe and Africa. Today, there's a theoretical limit to the length of a bridge span before the material breaks down. That is, the longer the bridge, the more of its structure is used just to keep the bridge from collapsing under its own weight. But scientists decided to try and find a new shape for the bridge and its supports. They discovered that the most mathematically optimal designs would include areas resembling the spokes of a bicycle wheel instead of a simple tower with a support. Then scientists tested split towers that also worked. So far it's just a theory, but if research goes further, making a bridge between Europe and Africa could be a bit simpler. Volcanoes coming up. Eurasian and African tectonic plates are colliding, causing earthquakes. We've already covered that. But recently, scientists found out that in the future, this means the complete closure of the Strait of Gibraltar. Using computational models, researchers from the University of Lisbon predicted that the tectonics under the Strait of Gibraltar would shift further into the Atlantic, creating a ring of fire. That is, an area with a lot of active volcanoes. Right now, there's the Pacific Ring of Fire, and in the future, a new one might appear. True, this will happen in 20 million years. It's a short period by geological standards, but by then it's unlikely anyone will care about the state of tunnels, bridges, or freight transport. Well, you owe me a like. See you later.